For us, the 4th of July symbolizes the birth of a superpower. We are accustomed to viewing the American War of Independence as an inevitable historical process, in which freedom-loving colonists were destined to defeat the old empire. In school textbooks, this conflict is presented as a battle between David and Goliath, ending in the triumph of democracy and the creation of a state that shaped the 20th century. But if we put aside the romanticism and take a cold, hard look at the maps and reports from 1776, the picture changes. The rebellion of the 13 colonies was a colossal gamble. The British Empire had the best navy in the world, a professional army, and enormous financial resources. The colonists, on the other hand, suffered from a shortage of gunpowder, a lack of unified command, and internal strife. A third of the population remained loyal to the crown. Washington's victory hung by a thread. It was made possible by a combination of circumstances, mistakes by British generals, logistical delays, and, most importantly, the intervention of France, which was eager for revenge. Remove one element from this equation, and the house of cards that was the revolution would collapse. What if this collapse had happened? What if George III had kept his pearl across the Atlantic? We would not have seen the Constitution, the Civil War of 1861, or the familiar map of the world. Instead, a completely different giant would have risen in the West. Watch the video to the end to find out how the history of the North American continent might have changed under the British Crown. Let's try to trace where exactly history could have veered off the path we know into a completely different direction. The year is 1776. The Declaration of Independence has already been solemnly signed by the Founding Fathers. However, a beautiful piece of paper with signatures cannot stop flying bullets and bayonet attacks. The Empire strikes back with tremendous force. A British expeditionary force under the command of the Howe brothers approaches the shores of America. General William and Admiral Richard lead the Armada. The landing of their troops in New York becomes a grand event. It is the largest and most complex amphibious operation of the entire 18th century. The British military machine is ready to crush the rebellion in its infancy. George Washington suffers a crushing defeat at the Battle of Long Island. His army is completely demoralized and on the verge of collapse. Soldiers lose faith in success and desert by the hundreds, throwing down their weapons. In real history, the British acted with extreme caution at this point. They gave the rebels a chance to retreat, still hoping for peace talks. But let's imagine that a completely different military doctrine prevailed in the British headquarters. The command decides to use a strategy of total suppression without mercy. Instead of letting Washington slip away in the fog across the East River, the trap snaps shut. Admiral Richard Howe uses the power of his fleet to completely block the crossing. The Continental Army finds itself in a deadly cauldron on the island of Manhattan. There is no way out, and hope for salvation fades with each passing hour. By the fall of 1776, the main forces of the rebellion are not simply retreating. They are completely captured or physically destroyed by superior enemy forces. The rebellion is effectively decapitated in one fell swoop. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and other key leaders of the resistance are arrested and await trial. This leads to a chain of events that changes the entire world. The key moment in our history, the Battle of Saratoga in 1777, simply does not happen. It was this battle that was supposed to convince the world powers of the strength of the Americans. But now there is no one to convince and nothing to convince them with. Paris is closely following events across the ocean and sees the complete defeat of the rebels in New York. French strategists decide not to risk their treasury and fleet for a cause that is obviously lost. King Louis XVI prefers to stay out of the conflict. He conserves resources and does not get involved in the war with Britain. This decision saves the French budget, but dooms the American Revolution. Without French money, gunpowder supplies, and naval support, resistance is impossible. The guerrilla movement in the colonies begins to suffocate from a lack of resources. It rapidly fades away by 1778. Disorganized troops cannot stand up to the regular army. The dream of independence is shattered by harsh reality. The 13 colonies are forced to return to the fold of the empire. They return not as victors or partners, but as losers. Now they are just rebellious provinces that need a firm hand. The British Crown establishes a new order here. A total reorganization of the administration of the territories begins. The history of North America is completely reset and takes a different path. The United States does not come into being. The experiment with democracy ends before it even begins. The world enters a new era under the complete domination of Britain. What if Britain's victory had led not to harsh repression, but to a series of smart and pragmatic reforms? Let's imagine that London realized one simple truth. It is no longer possible to rule such a vast and distant continent using the methods of old colonialism. Politicians understand that they need to change their approach in order to preserve the empire and its revenues. Immediately after suppressing the Open Armed Rebellion, the British Parliament decides on a bold step. Members of Parliament adopt a historic document called the Act of Reconciliation and Reorganization of 1780. This law is intended to atone for guilt and calm the population. The authorities decide to use carrots rather than just sticks. A new era begins in relations between the metropolis and its overseas territories. Instead of a multitude of scattered and constantly quarreling colonies, a single powerful administrative entity is created. It receives the proud and significant name of the Viceroyalty of North America. Now it is not just a collection of lands, but a single political entity with centralized power. The bustling and wealthy city of New York becomes the new capital of this vast domain. The Crown chose this city for a reason. New York is strategically located in the center of the coast and is a loyal trading center. It is from here that the monarch's will now extends across the entire continent. The financial flows and administrative resources of the renewed empire are concentrated here. London is eager to avoid a repeat of bloody riots in the future. Therefore, the government is making serious concessions that it previously refused to even consider. These are the very demands that moderate colonists made long before the war began. The colonies finally receive official representation in Westminster. Although limited, America's voice is now heard in the British Parliament. But far more important is another innovation that changes the economics of the relationship. The provinces are granted broad rights to internal self-government in exchange for regular tax payments. This becomes a fair and transparent deal between the center and the periphery. The famous revolutionary slogan about no taxation without representation instantly loses its relevance. The people no longer have a major reason for discontent. However, the most important and noticeable change concerns the western border of the possessions. We know that in real history, the United States began a chaotic and very aggressive expansion westward immediately after its victory. Settlers poured into the new lands in an unstoppable flood, sweeping away everything in their path. But in this alternative scenario, the British Crown acts completely differently. It is bound by strict diplomatic treaties with the Indian tribes. For London, the word of the monarch and signed documents carry weight. The famous Royal Proclamation of 1763 is now strictly observed. This document strictly prohibited settlers from arbitrarily occupying land beyond the Appalachian Mountains. Now the troops monitor this and violators are severely punished. Expansion into the Wild West is becoming an exclusively state task. The development of new lands is proceeding according to plan, under the control of officials and very slowly. The vast territory from the Ohio River to the Mississippi itself is turning into a giant buffer zone. It receives official status as Indian Territory and is under the personal protectorate of Britain. Of course, this decision greatly slows down agricultural colonization and the growth of farms. However, a much more stable and profitable trade network is created. The main emphasis is not on plowing the land, but on the organized extraction and sale of precious furs. The Indians become trading partners, not enemies to be destroyed. The region's economy develops harmoniously and without unnecessary bloodshed. By the year 1800, North America looks completely different from what we are used to. It is not a republic seething with passions, with constant elections and political disputes. What we see is an orderly, peaceful, and incredibly rich crown possession. There is no president elected by the people. Instead, the wise viceroy appointed by the monarch rules. There is no written constitution as in the United States, but the rights of subjects are protected by an updated Bill of Rights. Life flows steadily and predictably without revolutionary upheavals and civil conflicts. The streets of cities are exemplary in their order and safety. This peace is reliably ensured by garrisons of the famous Red Coats, which have become a symbol of stability. Let's imagine for a moment how the global balance of power would have changed at the beginning of the 19th century. The era of the Napoleonic Wars begins. In our history, the United States was a neutral player that managed to trade with both sides, and in 1812 even waged war against Britain, diverting its resources. In this scenario, Britain's rear is completely secure. North America's resources, timber, grain, cotton, and most importantly, human resources, are fully at the Empire's disposal. The Royal Navy gains thousands of experienced American sailors, not through forced recruitment, but as legal subjects. Napoleon Bonaparte faces a much more powerful blockade, but the most dramatic moment comes in 1803. In reality, Napoleon sold Louisiana, a huge territory stretching from New Orleans to Canada, to the United States to raise money for the war. There is no one to sell to here. The United States does not exist. Britain, which controls Canada and the Atlantic coast, simply seizes French Louisiana by force. The British Expeditionary Force enters New Orleans. The map of North America is colored pink with the Empire, stretching from the Atlantic to the Rocky Mountains. This changes the course of the war in Europe. With America's unlimited resources at its disposal, Britain strangles France's economy more quickly. Napoleon is likely to be defeated not in 1815, but as early as 1810. Europe emerges from the wars earlier, and Britain consolidates its status as the sole, absolute superpower for a century to come, without even any potential competitors. One detail changes the chain of consequences in the economy. By the middle of the 19th century, North America becomes not an agrarian appendage, but the second industrial heart of the empire. In our story, the Industrial Revolution in the US started later than in Britain. In this scenario, technology from Manchester and Birmingham is transferred seamlessly and instantly to Pennsylvania and New England. A single economic space without customs barriers creates a giant transatlantic market. Pennsylvania coal and iron are combined with British capital half a century earlier. Railways are built according to uniform imperial standards. London bankers finance the construction of factories in Philadelphia and Boston, viewing this as an investment in their home region. But the main stumbling block was the issue of slavery. This was the point of greatest tension. In reality, the British Empire abolished slavery in 1833, 30 years earlier than the United States. How would this have looked here? Southern planters in Virginia and Carolina would certainly have resisted the 1833 Parliament Act, but they had no chance of a civil war. They were not just up against the North, they were up against the full might of the British Empire and the Royal Navy, which controlled every port. Instead of the bloody carnage of 1861-1865, there would be forced compensatory emancipation. Britain pays compensation to planters, as it did in Jamaica, but harshly suppresses any attempts at rebellion. Slavery disappears in the 1830s. The South transitions to a system of wage labor and leasing, integrating into the textile economy of Lancashire as a supplier of raw materials, but without political autonomy. Let us compare the historical outcome we know with a possible alternative in terms of the global development of the continent. In our real history, the Wild West period is remembered as a zone of absolute freedom and mortal danger. It was a time of chaotic settlement, when people seized land wherever they wanted. We remember the madness of the gold rushes, which drove people crazy with greed. It was an era of endless and bloody wars with Indian tribes over every piece of prairie. Central authority was virtually absent in these vast territories. Each person decided their own fate and survived as best they could. In this harsh world, one could only rely on luck and a trusty revolver. However, under British rule, the movement of settlers to the Pacific Ocean looks completely different. This process is characterized by strict and highly organized imperial expansion. There is no place here for spontaneous migrations of individuals seeking a better life at their own risk. You can't just pack up a wagon and go wherever your eyes take you. Everything happens under the close supervision of officials and representatives of the Crown. Every step of the expansion of the borders is coordinated with the center in London. Land plots are distributed according to a registry, not according to the right of the first person who ran up and planted a flag. The state machine moves westward slowly but surely. This scenario is more reminiscent of the real historical development of the Canadian West or the colonization of Australia. It is very far from the American Westerns we are used to with their lawlessness. You will not see lone sheriffs here trying to single-handedly restrain gangs of robbers. Private initiative in matters of law and order is completely excluded here. Order in the new lands is maintained by the professional Royal Mounted Police. Disciplined men in red uniforms become a symbol of the law. They embody the power of the empire even in the most remote corners of the wild prairies. Crime is suppressed harshly and systematically, leaving no chance for banditry. The cities themselves also look completely different in this reality. Here you will not find chaotic settlements of tattered tents and hastily knocked together wooden shacks. Imperial engineers and surveyors arrive first to mark out the streets of future planned cities. Everything is calculated on paper before the first nail is driven. First, capital administrative buildings, courthouses, and stone churches are built. The infrastructure for civilized life is immediately created in the city. Only then, on prepared ground, do the first peaceful residents arrive. The chaos of the frontier is replaced by a boring but safe order. The conflict with Mexico over the rich lands of Texas and California is also inevitable in this version of history. The empire needs access to southern resources and the coast. But here, the Mexican army faces a completely different enemy. They are not fighting against scattered groups of volunteers and wild Texas Rangers. They are up against a professional, well-armed, and disciplined British regular army. The Mexicans have no advantage in knowledge of the terrain or tactics. British officers wage war according to all the rules of military science of the time. This turns the conflict from a guerrilla war into a large-scale military campaign. With the support of the powerful Royal Navy, the outcome of this war is practically a foregone conclusion from the very beginning. British ships block ports, cutting off supply routes. British ground forces act in a coordinated and methodical manner on the battlefield. They leave the enemy no chance for protracted resistance. By 1850, Britain had gained complete and unconditional access to the Pacific Ocean. The empire's borders stretched from ocean to ocean. Mexico was forced to sign a humiliating peace treaty and cede territory. The geopolitical map of the continent changed forever. However, the attitude towards the indigenous population here was different. The British colonial model, for all its well-known harshness, often acted more cunningly. London preferred to act pragmatically in order to conserve the army's resources. They preferred to create protectorates and use local elites for governance. This was more profitable than simply forcibly displacing the population or fighting them to the last man. Instead of total extermination or expulsion, which we have seen in real history, something else is happening. The Crown's diplomats are concluding complex agreements with tribal chiefs. The tribes recognize the supreme authority of the British monarch over themselves. In exchange for loyalty, they retain their ancestral lands and the right to internal self-government. They are not sovereign, but they are not powerless either. Thus, large Indian autonomies begin to form on the Great Plains. They are under the official protection of the Crown and British law. These are not at all like the reservations we know, where people died of hunger and disease. These are vast vassal territories with their own economies. They are similar to the rich principalities of British India of that era. The chiefs became part of the imperial aristocracy and even received salaries from the king. Their children were sent to study at the best colleges in London. Thanks to this policy, the indigenous culture was preserved much better. Of course, it was inevitably subject to strong external influences. The Anglican Church and the imperial administration made their own adjustments to their way of life, but their native languages and ancient traditions did not disappear without a trace. They were woven into the fabric of colonial life, adding color to it. A unique cultural fusion emerged. By the end of the 19th century, the entire continent is densely covered by a network of reliable railways. Construction is carried out according to a unified imperial plan, rather than chaotically. Steel highways directly connect the Atlantic ports of Halifax with the rest of the world. They pass through the industrial centers of New York and go to the docks of Vancouver. The transportation system works like a single, well-oiled machine without any glitches. Cargo and passengers move from east to west at unprecedented speeds. In this reality, there is simply no border along the 49th parallel. The maps look completely different from what we are used to seeing in geography class. There is no familiar straight line dividing the two countries. Canada and the 13 colonies have finally merged into a single political and economic entity. Before us stands the mighty dominion of North America. It is a superpower occupying most of the continent. By the beginning of the 20th century, our world looks completely different from what we are used to seeing in history textbooks. The very concept of America still exists, but now it is exclusively geographical in nature, rather than political. If you look at a map of the world from this period, you will notice the total dominance of the color pink. This color traditionally denotes the possessions of the British Crown, which is transforming into a global imperial federation. The boundaries between the old colonies and the metropolis are gradually blurring, creating a single superstate. This is no longer just a collection of scattered territories under the rule of a single monarch, but a unified political structure. The British Empire is evolving, uniting vast territories into a single entity. The entire planet is effectively divided, and the lion's share of the land is under Anglo-Saxon control. London remains an important ceremonial and political center of this vast power. Parliament sits here, and the royal court is located here, preserving the appearance of the old order. However, the real economic center of gravity is inexorably shifting across the ocean. It is there, in the vastness of the New World, that the industrial heart of the empire now beats. Cities such as New York and Philadelphia are becoming true industrial giants. They produce more steel, machine tools, and complex machinery than all of continental Europe combined. The factories of North America are operating at full capacity, providing the Federation with everything it needs. The Old World is gradually ceding its primacy to its younger and more energetic Western provinces. World War I, as we know it, may not happen at all in this world. Kaiser's Germany looks at the geopolitical map and sees a frightening picture. German strategists see that Britain and North America are now united and presenting a united front. This makes them realize the complete futility of any maritime rivalry. The Anglo-Saxon bloc has such overwhelming power in terms of resources and industry that any conflict seems suicidal. Potential adversaries realize that they will not even have time to deploy their armies. Any attempt at war is nipped in the bud by a brutal economic blockade. No one dares to challenge the power that controls all sea lanes and world trade. If war does break out due to some accident, it ends in a flash. There is no need to wait years for allies to gather strength or enter the conflict. In our history, we had to wait until 1917 for the United States to enter the war, but here the situation is different. The Federation's huge military machine is ready for battle from the very first second. The inexhaustible resources of the New World are mobilized from the first day of the conflict. Huge human reserves and endless streams of supplies are immediately sent to the front. The industrial power of the American territory simply overwhelms the enemy with its mass. Victory is achieved quickly, without protracted positional battles and years of suffering in the trenches. By the middle of the 20th century, something similar to Oceania from Orwell's novels is finally taking shape. However, this happens in a much milder and more liberal version, without total control over thoughts. This giant state formation firmly binds Britain, North America, Australia, and New Zealand together. The borders within this union become purely formal. English becomes the only language of science and international trade in this world. Other languages are preserved only at the everyday level, giving way to a universal means of communication. Any scientist or businessman must know English in order to achieve anything. The cultural and linguistic expansion of the Federation becomes absolute. Culturally, this world appears much more conservative and hierarchical than ours. There is less of a cult of individual success and personal gain that was characteristic of the independent United States. Instead, society has more respect for tradition, order, and public duty. British influence makes society more reserved and class-conscious. Phenomena such as jazz and rock and roll may appear, but in completely different forms. They pass through the strict filter of Victorian and Edwardian censorship, losing their rebellious spirit. Hollywood never becomes a global dream factory, remaining a provincial entertainment. Its place is taken by the powerful cinema of Toronto or the studios of London, which dictate fashion to the whole world. We have looked at a world in which the American dream did not separate from its British roots, but grew through them. This world seems alien to us, without a constitution, without a Bill of Rights, without stars on the flag. However, this alternative scenario paints a picture of remarkable stability. A unified Atlantic world avoided many of the bloody conflicts of the 19th and 20th centuries. Slavery ended without a civil war, and world wars might not have happened at all. The price of this stability is the absence of the bold spirit of experimentation and freedom that the United States has given the world. we would have a more orderly, secure, but perhaps less dynamic civilization. History took a risky path in 1776, and that risk has defined our reality. But knowing the alternative means better understanding the price of what we have. Subscribe so you don't miss new versions of history